All right, welcome back in here to Live Now from Fox. I am Andy Mack. Let's get into more of the aftershocks after the U.S. decided to strike Iran in those 3 nuclear sites. And let's talk about the Iranian government, the parliament threatening to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, we heard about that during the United Nations Emergency Security Council meeting. We're awaiting any comments here as, of course, the parliament in Iran has approved a measure to close the Strait of Hormuz, a critical global oil choke point. And while the parliament has voted in favor of closing that strait, the final decision remains with the supreme leader. And of course, this is a major waterway as some 20 million barrels of crude oil, or 20% of the global consumption, flowed through that strait in 2024. We're hearing more about it. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, was asked about that during an interview on Fox earlier on today. Let's get into exactly what the Strait of Hormuz is, what it means. And we're going to be joined right now by John Conrad V, CEO of G-Captain, a maritime expert. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. Give us a sense, what exactly is the Strait of Hormuz and how vital is it to this passageway there?
Well, a strait is where the waterway pinches, so all the ships that come from one region and area have to squeeze through a strait to get through. The biggest straits in the world are the Singapore Straits, the Taiwan Strait gets in the news, the Bab el-Mandeb going into the Red Sea, which the Houthis partially control. And then there are straits closer to home. The Florida Strait is between Florida and Cuba. But this is very critical because such a large percentage of oil and natural gas worldwide is in the Persian Gulf. And all the ships going to the Persian Gulf, the tankers, the gas carriers, and also the container ships supplying places like Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, have to squeeze through this strait, which is between the UAE and Iran. So all these ships have to get rather close to Iran to get out into the Indian Ocean and either turn into the Red Sea, go around Africa, or take a left and head towards the Pacific, China, Japan, Korea.
And can I ask, have we seen any sort of closure already? Have we seen boats or ships, vessels trying to get through there quickly, knowing this could come? Are we seeing any discrepancies, any update on what's actually happening right now at the moment?
No, we haven't. We've seen some related problems. There was two major tankers collided and one caught fire. The crews were able to escape regularly. One tanker was a Frontline Tanker, one of the best tanker companies. CEO is Lars Barstad, excellent company. But the tanker, the other tanker in the collision was one of these dark fleet tankers that are skirting around international rules and law to take oil from Iran to places like India and China, which want that lower cost oil that Iran is providing. So we haven't seen a closure yet. We've seen a lot of false alarms. There's potentially now, if you go on Twitter, every half an hour, someone says, a ship has turned around. Right now, there's an LNG carrier, one of these big gas carriers that might be stalling. And there are some ships that are not critical, which are going into ports or drifting before they get in there. And the simple reason for that is it's not critical cargo and insurance rates are spiking. If you look at the Red Sea, the Navy says it's going to protect some ships in the Red Sea that they can start going in. A lot of those ships have not returned because the insurance companies don't believe that it is fully safe. So when you look at insurance versus something else, it's cheaper to take the long way around Africa.
Yeah, we're a long way away from this closing. And I want to ask you, because the Strait of Hormuz there, right between Iran and Oman, UAE, you kind of mentioned in there, do they even have jurisdiction to close that down? Are these international waters? And does Iran even have a place to say that people can't go through this?
Well, you're right. They're international waters, and under the UN Convention of the Sea, countries are not allowed to impede the safe passage of commercial vessels through their waters. And you see it with our own in the Bering Strait between Alaska and Russia. China sent a bunch of Coast Guard vessels up there with Russia, and we did not stop them. That's part of international law. But Iran does not follow international law. International law is only enforced by, what can be enforced. We can enforce it with sanctions. We can enforce it with our Navy and a naval blockade. And then you have other nations that are signatory to this law of the sea, like China, which doesn't follow it. Right now, the UN said that they cannot have fishing boats in the Filipino water, and you see nearly every single week the Chinese Coast Guard going into Philippine waters and harassing these vessels. So most of this Iranian crude is going to China, and China picks and chooses what international law they want, and Iran mostly ignores international law.
All right, very interesting. I want to ask you what, obviously, the likelihood, unlikely that this happens, but if there is a disruption at all, how does that have a ripple effect on the energy around the globe? Because you mentioned some of the percentages of what it goes to China and whatnot. If there's a disruption at all, does it have a major impact?
Well, right. It's very unlikely that it would happen. And it's mostly who would be harmed most by that happening. One would be Iran. This is their major source of revenue. Without this open, they would themselves be in trouble because all of these Navy ships and minesweepers would surge into their backyard. There could be retaliatory strikes, as we say of J.D. Vance say today. It's not as big of a red line for the president as this nuclear factory is, but J.D. Vance said today it would be suicidal for Iran itself, and then it would upset China. So when you ask why hasn't Israel hit the oil terminals, well, they may not want to be in that diplomatic, we don't know how China will react, and a lot of the nations around don't want to upset them. You have Saudi Arabia, has had huge tensions with Iran before. That could be the impetus with those exports bottled up from Saudi Arabia or Kuwait for one of those nations to take out terminals on their own or turn that into a kinetic war.
And you mentioned the fact that Marco Rubio also said some comments earlier today about the Strait of Hormuz. Let's play out that, and I'm going to ask you a question after the fact. Hold on.
Do you expect Iran to move to close the Strait of Hormuz to try to disrupt oil transportation across the world?
Well, I encourage the Chinese government in Beijing to call them about that because they heavily depend on the Straits of Hormuz for their oil. If they do that, it'll be another terrible mistake. It's economic suicide for them if they do it. And we retain options to deal with that. But other countries should be looking at that as well. It would hurt other countries' economies a lot worse than ours. It would be, I think, a massive escalation that would merit a response, not just by us, but from others. So, look, they're going to say what they need to say. These are the things that need to happen for their own internal politics and so forth. But in the end, we're going to judge them by the actions that they take moving forward. We had 3 objectives. We struck those 3 objectives with decisive force. And that was the point of this mission. And that's what we achieved. What happens next will depend on what they do. They want to negotiate. We're ready to negotiate. They want to get cute and do things that are dangerous. We have responses available that are devastating.
All right, just listening in there again, that was Secretary of State Marco Rubio talking about that Strait of Hormuz, saying the Chinese might need to step in. And just to reiterate that point, mainly going through the Strait of Hormuz provides that crude oil to China, correct?
These weapons and their enrichment program, you need to get money somewhere. There are huge sanctions on Iran. So how is Iran getting the money to enrich all this uranium and build all these drones and that they're supplying to the Houthis and others and fund all these operations? Well, the majority of their state revenue is coming from selling oil to China, and they're selling it on these shadow vessels, which are not like the one that got in an accident, exploded in fire last week. These are not following international rules. They are dangerous vessels, but that selling that oil to China is their primary revenue source.
And of course, we're talking about this, and it's unlikely that it happens. Is there any precedent to this passageway, this kind of choke point there that is so vital? Is there any precedent to having this be disrupted or closed prior?
Well, going back to the 80s, we had the tanker war. There was a war between Iran and Iraq, and tankers were specifically targeted. But this was an intense naval battle between the two nations. And even during this time, they were not able to close the Strait of Hormuz. They have a few options here. They have a drone program. They're selling a lot of pretty high spec drones to Russia. We know those are effective. They have some anti-ship ballistic missiles, and they have mines. But how the Houthis are kind of able to have such an effect on shipping is the Red Sea is the size of California. Well, it's same with the Iranian coast. If you concentrate all those missiles and drones on the Strait of Hormuz, it is very easy for our military or Israel's military to target those. Same with these mines, like they could be put out in the water, but they have to be physically removed from the warehouses, loaded on ships, boats, and submarines. And hopefully, with our satellite intelligence, someone would explode up these mines before they get, they damage ships. So it's not a very easy thing to do. And even when they were desperate to do it in the 80s, they failed. They were able to hit a lot of tankers, though, just not close down the Strait of Hormuz entirely.
All right, very interesting. Just wanted to give a historical context to that. And we know, dating back to 2024, some 1/5 of all the crude oil there going through the Strait of Hormuz. Are there any alternate routes? You mentioned the Red Sea. You obviously have to get a little bit further to the west there. Are there any other alternate routes for these ships to go?
No, there are some limited pipelines. I believe Saudi Arabia built one into the Red Sea, but we have problems in the Red Sea right there. China just opened a train going into China that can do very limited deliveries. But you got to think a modern supertanker, these are absolutely enormous. They carry 200 million barrels of crude oil. I mean, it absolutely dwarfs what you could put in a set of railroad cars is one. Second is ships are 10 times more efficient than trains per ton mile. So the fuel cost is 10 times the amount to put it on trains, and the capacity is tiny. So pipelines work, but the other thing with pipelines is the Saudi Arabian pipelines are presumably a target. We saw in the Ukraine-Russian war when Russia started moving more through pipelines, they were destroyed by Ukraine. And even the undersea Nord Stream pipeline was easily damaged. So there are some limited pipeline options. I don't think train's an option, but those fixed asset, fixed rail terminals, fixed pipelines would be a rich target for Iran and their terrorist groups, Hamas, the Houthis, to go out and sabotage.
Yeah, and you mentioned the price tag. If that price goes up, it goes up for consumers around the globe. So that is an impact that could hit right at home for so many people around the world. I do want to ask you, because we're talking about all these ships, all these vessels that go through the Strait of Hormuz. What are the captains, what are the people working on these ships thinking, knowing that there's so much tension in the region and then there's also a threat to shut down? What's going on there? Are they concerned? Are they stressed?
Absolutely. Traditionally, the United States had the largest merchant marine after World War II, and we sold it off. And as we got out of shipbuilding, we've absolutely declined in our own merchant power. Maersk did a report recently that said to even consider, supplying our existing bases in the event of a war in the Pacific, we need 100 tankers. Right now, we have 9 tankers in the tanker security program, and one was just hit off the coast of England a few months ago. So most of these tankers, these thousands of tankers around the world, are not Americans. There are not many Europeans on it. They're mostly Filipino, Chinese, Indian, Russian, Ukraine. Some of those countries are really good. Filipino labor is good, but the Chinese ships specifically, and especially on these shadow tankers, you don't have very high-paid crude. They're often mistreated, and we know that the Chinese tankers, they have a commissar. Think back to the Hunt for Red October, where you have a political officer standing behind the captain. China is doing that right now with its 5,000 merchant ships, where the United States only has 80 in international service. So there are ways, they're stressed out, but you're stuck on a ship, your government not supports you, or you have a communist commissar because you're on a Russian or Chinese ship. You don't have many options but to continue into port.
Are lots of these ships flagged with the Chinese flag? Is that common, or are they spread out? How would you assess that?
Yeah, the Chinese flag is the largest flag in the world. It's not a huge tanker fleet, a lot of container ships, but China and Greece, compete back and forth for the largest ship owner in the world. But Greece is a lot of small families that kind of work together, where China is this big, massive company supported like Costco. And then you have, a number of other countries. We have ships that are like International Seaways is an American company based in the United States, but they foreign flag their tankers. So the executives are American. Their CEO is actually a former U.S. Navy reservist. But the crews are not American on board these ships. But yes, to answer your question, China has a large fleet. Russia has a large fleet. Absolutely.
All right, very interesting. This is so very fascinating to talk about these waterways, these corridors that are so vital to the world economy. Anything that you're looking forward to over the next week? Because I know we are also awaiting potentially retaliation from Iran. Anything you're watching in terms of the Strait of Hormuz or elsewhere there?
Well, there's so much that can happen, and I did a little list of potential tweets on my X account saying, what will happen first? Will the Houthis ramp up the Red Sea? Will Israel or the United States attack a oil terminal? Maybe another ally wants to attack a terminal, because we seem to be giving, if not a green light, more of a yellow light to our allies to take independent action. You think of the millions of people who came up through the border, the Darien Gap in Panama, to cross the U.S. border. They all passed through Panama. How many Iranians and, aligned parties remained in Panama? Could they sabotage the Panama Canal? Could this turn into a greater war where we start sending Army and more Navy vessels in there? Can they close the Strait of Hormuz? I mean, there are dozens of possibilities. Each individual one is a low probability event, but when there are so many of these, it just takes one to really escalate things in the region and have an effect, particularly on shipping.
Yeah, that is so very good point. Of course, so many chokeholds, choke points there at different points around the world that would be fascinating. And of course, we're talking about military strikes by Iran, but this could be a different type of retaliation. So we'll see what's to come. Captain John Conrad, thank you so much for your time, your insight here on Live Now from Fox. Great talking with you.